Well, thank you very much, Maggie, and it's a real pleasure to be invited here today to share some thoughts about the evolution of Digital London and the evolution of our digital lives. My full title is Deputy Mayor for Social Integration, Social Mobility, Community Engagement. It's a long title, but Deputy Mayor for Social Integration is probably the shorthand. And I should probably make it clear that we see the evolution of London as a digital city and how it evolves to be fundamental, and I emphasise fundamental, to improving social integration in London and to improving the lives and well-being of Londoners. Just to explain very slightly before I go into a little bit more detail about that, you might be saying, well, what do you mean by social integration? And so I've been in post for about a year, and we've spent about a year thinking quite hard about how we're going to develop some of the policies that we'll be releasing and you'll be hearing about within the next month or two. We spent quite a long time incubating some really, what we think are really good ideas and good programs. And we started off with some really helpful work that had been done previously by the Social Integration Commission, which viewed social integration as contact mainly. In other words, you measured social integration by understanding how people came into contact with people that were different from themselves. And sometimes it was used as a euphemism for kind of racial integration. People often thought of it as being about ethnicity, essentially, whereas of course we view it much, much more broadly than that. It's about older Londoners, it's about LGBT communities, it's about social class, it's about cutting across all aspects of Londoners' lives. It's not simply a euphemism for race, ethnicity, or religious integration. But we have extended social integration into beyond contact and relationships, into areas such as fairness. Fairness and equality, we think, is a fundamental aspect of social integration. You could have lots of contact with people that are different from you, but if your contact is opening the door for them as they go into the office every morning, that's not necessarily meaningful equality contact. Or making the tea or coffee for them every morning is not necessarily a great contact if you want to have an equal and fair stake in society. So fairness and removing inequality is a really important part of social integration. And participation, being an active citizen, being able to participate in the collective life of your city is a really, really important part of social integration. And we believe that all those three ingredients, contact, fairness, and participation, are dramatically enhanced by properly integrating a digital life and your life in a digital city into every aspect of those three things, contact, fairness, and active citizenship. You've probably heard some of the statistics about London already, so I'll go through them quite quickly. But when you go away from this conference hall today and you get on the tube, or probably more pertinently from what I'm about to say, you get on the bus and you look around at the other people, the other Londoners who are travelling, and you count up who's on the bus with you and what the numbers are, just bear in mind, about 1 in 15 households in London do not have internet access. In London, do not have internet access, about 1 in 15. About 1 in 12 people in London, have never used the internet. Have never used the internet. 1 in 12 people. It's pretty astonishing. And about 1 in 7, or maybe a bit more actually, close to 20%, but around 1 in 7, do not have basic digital skills. So when you look on the bus and you look on the tube and you look at the people around you, 1 in 7 probably don't have basic digital skills. And of course, for certain groups, such as disabled Londoners and others, the numbers are much higher than that, older Londoners in particular as well. And that must change if we're going to reduce inequality and improve public services. That's got to change. It's very, very important. So there are 4 areas that concern us at City Hall, and I think are relevant to the really good work that is being done here by the organisations that are here today. The first that concerns us is infrastructure. We've got to have a good infrastructure if we're going to have a meaningful digital life. It's the equivalent of having running water, proper sanitation, electricity going out to the various parts of a society. You've got to have a digital infrastructure. If you don't have that, nothing moves. And so we must all collectively be able to lobby for an important digital infrastructure within our city. You've got to enable people, including the poorest people, to have access to being online in the same way that you have to have, if we'd been talking about this sort of gathering 150 years ago, we'd be saying you've got to allow poor people to have access to proper sanitation in order for them to be healthy and live a meaningful life, and you've got to allow them to be literate and got to help them be literate, because you can't have people engaging in society if they can't read well. And similarly, we've got to have people in a situation where they have access to being online. And thirdly, you've got to have a way of giving them competent skills. It's very good that in the latest digital proposals by the government, there is a requirement, an obligation to ensure that people have access to being able to be educated in digital skills, but we think that's going to be very, very important moving forward into the future. And so we support the work that's being done, particularly by the people in this room, to ensure that people have good digital skills. I was talking to Helen earlier yesterday and today. The idea that teaching digital skills is kind of computer training in the way that kind of once was done through the Job Centre is laughable. Computer skills are the fundamentals of living in the modern world, and if you don't have those skills, then you're really in trouble, and we can't allow Londoners to be in trouble in that way. And finally, we're really interested in advocacy coming with your assistance, advocacy about the quality of services. And what I mean by that is that if there is consensus that we have to have good digital skills and a good digital environment and a good digital life for Londoners, then we're all familiar with those who are in positions in the public sector, in government, local government or central government, thinking that they're coming up with brilliant ideas as to how you can save costs, be more efficient and more inclusive by having some brand new scheme that's going to allow everybody to do everything that they were doing previously but in a digital way. And we're all familiar with the idea that sometimes those things can be, at the very best, a very mixed bag and can isolate some of the people that are most important in society to be assisted. So we will need your help and your assistance in engaging with those services, those projects, those ideas, to make sure that they actually do serve the purpose that the people devising them or commissioning them want them to serve. So in other words, whether it's in the context of the court system, whether it's the context of tax, immigration, whether it's the context of legal services or housing or employment, there will be people who will be engaging with those services in a digital way because somebody somewhere has decided that's going to be really convenient and they're going to be able to do that effectively. And you will be sitting there with those people who are struggling to do it. And we will need your advocacy to say, yes, it works in this environment, but no, it doesn't work in that environment. And it would be so much better if you could do it in that way. We at City Hall will need that assistance from you if we're going to be able to advocate properly for effective and meaningful digital solutions. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the Mayor's commitment and what the Mayor's doing in relation to this. The Mayor is committed to giving more Londoners the skills and support that they need. It's been something that he's been preoccupied with really from even before he came into office. And he wants to give special focus to including older Londoners to ensure that they have the skills that they need and that everybody has online access to the public services that they need. For older Londoners, it's really important. We're in a transition phase. Some of us, I've got sufficient grey in my beard to be able to remember when there was no such thing as a digital life at all. And there are other people in this room who cannot imagine a world where there was no such thing as a digital life at all. And probably most of us are a bit in between. We do remember a little bit about a world without any digital life, but we're very comfortable with a world with a digital life. And I think we're in a transition phase. And so there is going to be a reducing number of people who never had a working life or an education or a childhood where they interacted with the world digitally. Those people are getting older and older, but they need help and they need assistance and they need to be able to be incorporated into the digital world as it's developing. So we need to make sure that Londoners have those basic digital skills that we're talking about, and we have particular focus on disabled people, people with disabilities, a third of whom are offline. Older people, as I've said, we're interested in making sure that those who are excluded more generally have access to digital services that they need. And we want to narrow the gaps that exist on gender and ethnic lines in relation to people's engagement with the digital world that they live in. The GLA has signed the government's Digital Inclusion Charter, and obviously want to get everybody available and online by 2020. And just three sort of quick points of some of the action that we're doing at the moment. We have a diversity and inclusion strategy that is coming out very soon, probably within the next month or two. We're finalising how that looked. We had a consultation paper that we put out, my team put out, for diversity and inclusion a few months ago. We've had the feedback from that and we're going to be publishing the full strategy. People used to see that as some kind of equalities document that would sort of meet some basic equality strategy, but we are trying to do something much more ambitious with that. And because we're trying to do something much more ambitious, we are incorporating into our equality and diversity inclusion strategy aspects of what digital inclusion means and aspects of how people need to be equally included in the digital world in relation to that. So we're piloting projects that give support to people to get online. We've got some really interesting projects across London. Very important project called My Wi-Fi, which is one where we give out iPads to older Londoners who can borrow them like library books for a month at a time and use the iPad and get familiar online, being able to get engaged with the digital life. I'm sure anecdotally we all know about our older relatives who thought they would never want to use a computer, then see an iPad, and like a wide-eyed 5-year-old start to be able to press the buttons and start to use it and think, this is really good, I didn't realise I could do stuff with this. That's a really interesting programme, and we hope that we're going to develop on that. We're supporting the digital transformation of London's boroughs. We've got a new Chief Digital Officer who's leading on that work, very excited about that. And we're working with central government and London boroughs in relation to improving their digital strategy as it applies to London. But we're really advocating very hard, the Mayor's advocating very hard for improved connectivity for London, particularly London's businesses and particularly those not spots, which shouldn't exist in a city that we believe is a global leader in business and enterprise like London is. MyFi is part of our overall innovation, and so we're interested in trying to find, and we're interested in your ideas on innovative schemes that we can use within communities to make sure that we're in a situation where communities are getting the best ideas. If there are ways of incubating ideas, finding out who's got ideas that are out there, good ways of funding them, making sure that you're accessing the grant funding that we have for redevelopment, regeneration, and other things from City Hall, then please let us know. Please find ways to put the people with ideas into touch with the people like us who have money to help fund those ideas. Please do that. And also, please ensure that those of you who are working in community groups, this isn't about simply exciting ways of getting 25-year-olds who are caffeinated and full on pizza, who've got great ideas about startups and then want to flip them into big companies. It's not just about that. It's about those of you who are doing work within communities on the ground who need the assistance of City Hall. That's what we're there for. We're not venture capitalists. We're the public authority who want to promote best practice in the digital sphere. We want to help you in that way, but we have funds to be able to do that. So please engage with us on that basis. The Chief Digital Officer is doing a range of things. It's probably not helpful for me to try and give you a summary of all of them, but we are developing a London Office of Technology and Innovation, which allows boroughs to collaborate with each other. We're trying to help with best practice. In my particular team, as part of Social Integration Brief, we're supporting London's sports innovation of the Sports Tech Hub. I'll be speaking there this evening, which has just been opened in Borough, where they're developing sport tech. We're hoping to develop incubators for law tech and public tech and other really interesting environments, business environments. But I have a particular interest in data. My background is as a lawyer. I have some experience and expertise in data and information. And I'm really, really interested in making sure that we have good ways that smaller organisations, those who work in communities, can provide data and share data and feel data is protected and secure. We need data. Businesses, governments, everybody runs on data. It's our energy. It's what we need to be able to function properly. Data is absolutely everything for us. So as a result, if we can get as much data as possible from all of you, then that's going to be really significant. And one of the things we're telling smaller community groups is if you are not sure what you have to offer in terms of the product that you're producing, because you're serving communities and you're saying, well, we're too busy serving a community in order to be able to say, how do we get funding, or what are we providing other than a service to that community? You'll be able to gather data about communities that the rest of London doesn't know about. That data is very, very valuable to all of us who are trying to provide services. And so if we can skill up smaller groups, smaller community groups to be able to find simple templates through which they can gather data about their users and feel confident in sharing that data, and then we can help spread that data out through London through the units we have, through the London data store that we have at the moment, through the intelligence unit we have at the GLA. If we can share that information with London, then we're in a situation where we're finally getting information about all of London and including all Londoners within that. But we need your assistance in gathering that data, and we need you to feel confident that when you're giving that data to us, it's being shared securely. We need to be global leaders in collecting data and global leaders in protecting data. So that's really important to us. Finally, just some additional points. Financial inclusion is a really important part of our digital lives, and therefore the fairness and aspect of making sure that we're breaking down barriers that prevent people from engaging in other aspects of their life, and making sure that they can have access to bank accounts, have access to being able to use funds, increasingly have access to how to interact with a cashless society, so that people have simple ways, people of low income have simple ways that they don't need necessarily to have cash in order to be able to get what they need, is really important. One of the ways we're doing that is from the other end, which is what we're trying to do, is to ensure that there's not a poverty premium imposed on people who don't have sufficient money and can't engage digitally. So we're trying to make sure that if you are a company, you don't have a business model that penalises somebody who's poor or penalises somebody that can't engage digitally. But at the same time, it's absolutely critical that we ensure that everybody eventually has the ability to be able to engage digitally, no matter what their income level and no matter what background they're coming from. There's a digital skills gap that we're really keen to develop, and I don't just mean that in terms of basic digital literacy. I mean that in terms of the education of children, the education of students, the education of businesses into being able to improve digital skills. We are going to have a devolved adult education budget coming soon, and as a result, we want to make sure we're using that adult education budget to find innovative ways to improve people's understanding of how they can use digital skills in a whole range of environments, including a really interesting conversation with Helen. Lots of you will be very, very familiar with this, about how you're combining ESOL work with digital literacy. And that's an absolutely critical, very, very important, really interesting way of being able to do digital literacy and digital skills development alongside developing English skills, both of which are vital if you're going to participate properly in London's life. And of course, when it comes to digital connectivity, we want London to be a leading world-class hub of technology. We want businesses in London to be able to thrive in a digital environment. But that does also mean that we're not just interested in those amazing businesses, global businesses, huge business leaders who set up in King's Cross in beautiful, shiny offices, having the very, very best access to what the world has to offer on internet and digital skills. It means that those random, small 20-year-olds who are living on a housing estate in southeast London or in some outer part of a London borough who aren't necessarily in the middle of the hub of London's business environment, they too can find a way to get online and develop entrepreneurship, small entrepreneurship, community entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, but can develop entrepreneurship and get the most of the benefit that the modern world has to offer in terms of the flatness of access, if it works properly, to being able to grow your business in a quick way through the use of digital accessibility and digital skills. There are many, many young people in London, we've found, who their problem isn't that they don't want to interact with the internet. The problem is that they're having difficulty finding the best way to be able to do so. It's not that they don't want to start businesses, or it's not that they don't want to develop their education. They just need a digital way to interact with that. And we have to be sensitive to that. So that's really a very quick rush through of the sorts of things that we're interested in, why I'm really glad to be here today to be able to share with you our ideas, but also really inspired, genuinely inspired from the City Hall side of things, of those of you here today who are doing this work across London. As I said to Helen when we met recently, I don't need to be persuaded that the work you're doing is important. I get it, I really do. We're fully behind it. What I'm really interested in is how you can best communicate with us what you need from the Mayor, and how the Mayor's ambition can best be translated through the work that you're doing. I'll probably end with saying that from our perspective, in terms of, and particularly my perspective in terms of the brief of caring about those Londoners who are often most excluded, a digital life and promoting digital life is not promoting a better life. A digital life isn't a better life than your analog life, as we all know. Neither is it a separate life from your analog life. Your digital interaction is your life. It's part of your life. Some of the things you do in relation to that are not going to be as much fun as when you did them in an analog way. Reading on a screen sometimes isn't as nice as reading a newspaper. Interacting digitally is sometimes better, sometimes much, much better, sometimes worse than interacting in an analog way. But the sooner we start to break down the separation of those things, and the sooner we start to view our entire life as being a mixture of how we've done things face-to-face and physically and how we do things digitally, the easier it is for us to start to break down those barriers between people who feel the digital world is not for them and people who feel that they only want to live in a digital world. Both those things are critical, and our job, from the City Hall point of view, is to promote that and make sure that London is really at the cutting edge of incorporating the digital world into people's lives to make sure that they live fully rounded lives. Thanks very much.
Okay, So we just have a couple of minutes for questions before I think you need to shoot off as well, don't you?
Yeah,
or are you able to stay till the very end?
I'm afraid I can't stay to the very end.
Well, you do know that means you will not be entitled to go in the draw for the iPad mini. I just want to emphasise this. So if you can contain your disappointment about that, we'll move on to some questions. Okay, so, I mean, I've got, question at the back. Have we got the doodah box? Here? Oh gosh, right, maestro. Unless you, what's your sporting prowess like? Does that?
Yeah, it's not bad.
Is it okay? Right, well, it's got to go to...
I don't really want to throw a box away.
Well, I'm going to have a go.
Well done.
Hello. Thank you for a very inspiring view of the future developments in London. I work for a small charity based in Kingston. We're a digital charity. And you were very keen to say that we could get in touch with you. I mean, what are the mechanisms to pass through our ideas, what we're doing at a local level, what we're struggling with, and also information about the funding sources that you mentioned?
Well, I'll make sure that... I'll make sure that... sorry, don't throw it at me. I'll make sure that Helen and everybody else has the relevant contact details. Some of my officers here, Siobhan McKenna, who leads on a lot of this work, she's waving her hand over there. She's here, and she's obviously available to talk with people, I think, for a little while after we finish. But realistically, I'll make sure you have all the details. What we're at the moment in trying to do, there's been a range of grants that are already coming out from City Hall, and they're about to come out. Some of them don't necessarily seem to fall immediately within your obvious head. So that there might be something where you're a digital charity and you're thinking, well, nothing here applies to us, but you might be doing a lot of work that's actually very centred on social integration, and therefore, or redevelopment, and therefore some of our other funding might be very good for that. And so from that point of view, what we're trying to do is develop a comprehensive guide, really, to what's out there at City Hall and funding, and so give you a kind of understanding as to what you might be eligible to apply for and what the criteria is. That's not completely finished at the moment because some of those grants are being developed and going to be released soon, some of those sources of funding. But in terms of what we've got at the moment, we can certainly give you the most up-to-date information we have, and I'll make sure that's available through the organisers here.
Fantastic. A great question. I'm sure that was on the lips of many people who are based in the London area. Another question? Yep, Dan. Go on.
Who am I aiming for? Right.
Thank you, very good throw. My name's Salim, I'm from an organisation called Smartlight. We're a flagship centre in Smartlight. We're a flagship centre in Birmingham. I travelled down on the train this morning and travelling down noticed almost everybody was either on a phone, iPad, laptop. I'll get off the phone, I'll go onto the underground. Everyone there is on a phone, laptop, iPad. So I was most impressed or surprised with the stats you gave as to how many people don't have IT skills, don't have internet in the house, etc. Some of the issues we face in Birmingham are very similar to what you face here in London as well. And what my question really is, I'd be very interested to know what you're doing as an organisation to support people who have language barriers, but they need to get digital. For example, as we know, universal credit is now by default all digital. Have to have an email address, have to have an online account. But for those who have language barriers, and we support many of them through English My Way, they're still struggling to speak the language and understand the language. So for them to go online is another barrier. What is London doing to address that problem?
So there are three things that you've raised there, which I think are all really important. The first one is about, what you saw as you came in and what the statistics show. And I think, just if I can divert for a second, that really emphasises to me one of my pet concerns, which is that in the modern, particularly political environment, we talk with so many anecdotes about, well, I saw this, or when I was on the steps, my constituent told me that. It's all nonsense in a lot of ways because it doesn't mean anything in terms of hard evidence. So I think it's a very valid point you're making that what you see doesn't necessarily represent the numbers, and therefore we should be really careful of kind of generalising from our own experience. So it's a really good point you're making there. Secondly, in terms of the education of people who need English skills to be able to get online, and what we're doing in London in relation to that. The second thing I would say about that is that We do have quite a few programs that are really concerned with people with reduced English skills, really driven around our work around migrants. So I chair a big panel, a London Strategic Migrant Partnership, which we bring in the Home Office, various other people, various groups. We also have a smaller panel which feeds into that panel from one of my officers chairs. So that we make sure those issues, particularly around ESOL, and we've done quite a lot of work around ESOL, commissioned some good work lately to find out what the needs of Londoners are. I think the point that you're making, though, which brings me to my third issue, is the overlap between digital skills and English skills. And universal credit's a good example of how, if it's digital first only, you're going to need your English skills alongside your digital skills. I think from our point of view at City Hall, what we can't do is try and provide that service ourselves, because we're not, the way, I could tell you for all sorts of reasons why, the way the mayor is funded and the way the mayor does the work, we're not geared up in terms of statutory responsibilities and other things and our relationship with boroughs to be able to suddenly charge in and do that work. What we can do is support organisations, and some of the organisations here that are doing that work. So we are very, very interested in making sure that we are supporting organisations that do that work, providing funding if we can to those organisations, and making sure that we are bringing the digital agenda into the ESOL agenda in the most meaningful way. So if I'm going to try and answer your question as direct as I can, this is an area that we are just really getting to understand in terms of getting feedback from those dealing with universal credit and those dealing with ESOL provision, some of whom, in fairness, haven't themselves raised with us in such an articulate way the overlap between digital skills and ESOL skills. So I can tell you now that overlap is a priority area for me, and it's going to be very, very important in terms of benefit access moving forward. So definitely watch this space on that. We plan to do some work on that over the next year.
Excellent. Great question. We need to get that catch box over to that person. I'm not just being perverse. I can't help but think this defeats the point of a catch box.
You could do it in a few. It doesn't have to be all in one go.
It's a pass box. Okay.
Oh, hello. I'm Evie from North Somerset Training, and I just want to, it's not a question, it's just to clarify something. When you say English as a barrier for ESOL speakers, I am an ESOL speaker, as you can see, you can hear, but my clients are not. They are all English, and they cannot understand English themselves, so I think you should look at English as a language for everybody, not only for the ESOL speakers, but for the native English speakers as well, because they have a barrier as well. I work with them.
Yeah, I think it's you can take that point almost in a comic way, but I don't take it that way. I take it as a serious point, and I don't think you would get much attendance if you tried to convince people born in England who would view English as their first language. If you start telling them they don't speak English well enough, I'm not sure you get a huge amount of people going into classes. But I think it is a really valid point when it comes to services that you're providing online, which require people to have a certain level, not of English necessarily, but a certain type of way of interacting or obtaining information, or a certain way of understanding the way a document is worded and phrased, which may be unfamiliar to them, even though they would not in a million years consider themselves not being people who can't speak English. They speak English perfectly well. They just aren't familiar with that kind of language that's in those sorts of documents. And normally they'd have someone mediating that for them. So there are different ways we can do that. Some of the ways you can do that is through having assistance and having centres that some of you work in that provide that kind of assistance to people. Others are ways that you can use new technology and smart devices to be able to do that mediation in some environments themselves. There are ways that you can take something away from being an online version that you read and being a way that you communicate with a machine that will talk to you and ask you the questions. Now, there's dangers with that. Sometimes those things don't work very well. And trying to roll that out on a mass level, you can imagine already what the problems might be with something like that. But realistically, I think if the point you're making is that we must make sure that people who don't find reading those documents an easy way of gaining that information and then providing it, that they have some way of being able to have someone help them with that or something help them with that makes it more understandable. That's a really, really valid point. And that goes not just to kind of what we're talking about with ESOL, but that just goes to making that information more accessible. So I agree, but I wouldn't classify it necessarily as an English problem. I'd classify it as a problem of comprehension. Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much, Matthew. If there are any further questions in the room, if you share them with Helen, we'll make sure that they get forwarded on. But for now, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you.